The slap echoed through my living room like a gunshot. My son-in-law Bradley had just struck me across the face after I refused to let him move into my home. He'd sold his own house and blown through $230,000 on gambling and God knows what else. When I said no, he grabbed my collar and told me I had no say anymore. His hand connected with my cheek so hard I tasted blood. My daughter Amanda stood frozen, horrified. That same afternoon I sat in my den with ice on my face and called my lawyer Harold. 3 days later, when the process server handed Bradley the subpoena, his face turned completely white. Let me back up and tell you how we got to that terrible moment, because it didn't start this way. My name is Jean, and I'm 68 years old. I spent 38 beautiful years married to my wife Carol before cancer took her from me 2 years ago. We built a good life together in our 4-bedroom house here in suburban Pennsylvania. Bought it back in 1987, when the neighborhood was still being developed. Raised our daughter Amanda in that house, celebrated every birthday and holiday, watched her grow into a wonderful woman. I'm a retired electrical engineer. Spent 42 years working for the same company, designing industrial control systems. The work was good, steady, and it gave us a comfortable life. After Carol passed, I figured out how to live alone. It wasn't easy at first. The silence in the house felt heavy, especially at night. But I developed routines. I kept busy with my woodworking hobby in the garage, building birdhouses and small furniture pieces. Had coffee twice a week with my old friends from the plant. Guys I'd known for decades. We'd sit at the diner downtown, solve the world's problems, tell the same stories we'd been telling for years. Amanda was my anchor through the grief. She'd call me every few days, sometimes just to chat about nothing important. Those calls meant everything. She's 32 now, works as a dental hygienist at a practice about 15 minutes from my house. Smart, kind, got her mother's warm heart and my stubborn streak. She married Bradley 5 years ago, when she was 27. I'll be honest, I liked him at first. He was charming, one of those guys who could light up a room when he walked in. Worked in pharmaceutical sales, always had stories about his clients, seemed to be doing well for himself. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom house about 20 minutes from me. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. They'd invite me over for Sunday dinners. Amanda would make pot roast. Bradley would talk about his latest sales numbers, and I'd feel grateful that my daughter had found someone who seemed to love her and treat her well. Everything appeared normal, happy even. The kind of life Carol and I had always hoped Amanda would have. I managed my own life pretty well, kept the house maintained, did my own repairs when I could, hired help when I couldn't, stayed active, took walks around the neighborhood every morning. The house was too big for just me, but it held too many memories to sell. Every room had Carol in it somehow. The kitchen where she'd baked cookies for Amanda's school events. The living room where we'd watched television together every evening. The bedroom where we'd talked about everything and nothing for all those years. I trusted Bradley completely. Why wouldn't I? He showed up when he said he would. He was attentive to Amanda. He had a good job. He seemed responsible. When they talked about their future, buying a bigger house someday, maybe having kids, it all sounded solid. I was proud to call him my son-in-law. I thought Amanda had chosen well, that she'd found a partner who would build a life with her the way Carol and I had built ours. That trust made what came next so much worse. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring, about 3 months before the slap, when Amanda called me. Her voice sounded different, shaky, tight. She asked if she could come over alone, without Bradley. My stomach dropped immediately. A parent knows that tone. Something was wrong. She arrived 20 minutes later. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework when she was little, and she told me everything. Bradley had sold their house, just like that. Told her they'd made a huge profit and were going to upgrade to something better. The house had sold for $230,000, and at first Amanda thought maybe it was good news. Maybe Bradley really did have a plan. But then she found things. Betting slips stuffed in his car's glove compartment, casino receipts in his jacket pockets, credit card statements showing charges at online gambling sites, cash advances, unexplained expenses. When she confronted him, he'd been defensive, told her she was overreacting, said he had everything under control. He insisted they'd made money on investments, that he knew what he was doing. Amanda pulled out her phone and showed me bank statements. My hands started shaking as I looked at the numbers. The $230,000 from the house sale had already shrunk to $115,000. In less than 6 weeks, Bradley had been gambling heavily for over a year. She'd discovered he'd hidden it well, but now the house sale had given him access to a large sum of money all at once, and he couldn't control himself. She was terrified. Her voice broke as she told me she didn't know what to do. She still loved him. She wanted to believe he'd stop, that they could work through it. But the money was disappearing so fast, and Bradley was becoming secretive, defensive, angry whenever she asked questions. He kept telling her about one big win that would fix everything, that would put them back on track. Then she told me the worst part. Bradley had been taking out personal loans too. Small ones at first, from banks and credit unions. Then larger ones from sources she didn't recognize. She'd found paperwork showing he owed money to people she'd never heard of. When she asked him about it, he told her to trust him, that he had a system, that he was about to turn it all around. I sat there looking at my daughter, seeing the fear and confusion in her eyes, and I felt something ignite in my chest. A protective rage I hadn't felt since she was a little girl and some kid had pushed her off the swing set at the playground. But this was so much worse. This wasn't a playground bully. This was her husband, someone who was supposed to protect her, and he was destroying their future. I kept my voice calm, even though everything in me wanted to drive to wherever Bradley was and shake some sense into him. I told Amanda I'd help however I could. I asked her what she wanted to do. She didn't know. She was caught between hope that Bradley would change and fear that he wouldn't. She asked me not to confront him yet, said she needed to try to handle it herself first. I agreed, but inside I was already planning my next move. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. A week after Amanda's tearful confession, I called Bradley directly, kept my tone friendly, casual. Told him I wanted to have a man-to-man conversation, maybe grab lunch, talk about how things were going. To my surprise, he agreed readily. We met at a diner halfway between our houses on a Saturday afternoon. Bradley looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual swagger seemed dimmed. We ordered sandwiches, made small talk about the weather and sports, and then I gently steered the conversation toward what really mattered. I told him Amanda had mentioned they were going through some financial challenges. I said I wanted to help if I could, that I'd spent decades managing budgets and planning for the future, and maybe I could offer some advice. At first, Bradley seemed receptive, almost grateful. He admitted he'd had a rough patch, said some investments hadn't panned out the way he'd hoped. He used a lot of vague language, talking about market fluctuations and timing issues. But when I pressed for specifics, asked to see documentation, suggested we sit down with a financial planner together, his demeanor shifted. He became irritated, defensive. Started talking about how I didn't understand modern finance, how things worked differently now than when I was working. He said he had opportunities I couldn't comprehend, connections in industries I knew nothing about. The charm was gone, replaced by something harder, almost contemptuous. I stayed calm. Years of dealing with difficult colleagues and managing engineering teams had taught me how to keep my emotions in check. I told him I wasn't trying to insult his intelligence or abilities. I just wanted to help protect my daughter's future. That's when he really shut down. Bradley pushed his half-eaten sandwich away and told me he didn't need my help. Said Amanda was his wife, their finances were their business, and I needed to trust that he knew what he was doing. Then he stood up, threw $20 on the table, and walked out. Left me sitting there with a cold cup of coffee and a growing sense of dread. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda's calls became less frequent. When I did reach her, she was brief, distracted. She'd tell me everything was fine, that she and Bradley were working things out, but I could hear the strain in her voice. I tried not to push too hard, didn't want to drive her away, but the silence scared me more than her tears had. Then I ran into my neighbor Dorothy at the grocery store. Dorothy is 73, been living on my street since before Carol and I moved in. She knows everything that happens in the neighborhood. She pulled me aside in the produce section and lowered her voice like she was sharing state secrets. She'd heard from her niece, who worked at the front desk of the Sunset Motel out on Route 30, that Amanda and Bradley had been staying there for the past week and a half, paying by the night. My heart sank. The Sunset Motel was one of those places people stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Worn carpets, flickering neon sign, weekly rates advertised on a sun-faded banner. I drove there immediately. Found Amanda's car in the parking lot, knocked on the door of room 114. Amanda answered, and the sight of her broke my heart. She looked exhausted, worn down. The room behind her was small and dingy, clothes piled on a chair, the smell of old cigarette smoke embedded in everything. She let me in, and we sat on the edge of the bed. She told me the money was almost gone, down to $48,000 now. Bradley kept saying they just needed a little more time, one more week, one more shot at the big win that would solve everything. She'd stopped arguing with him because every conversation turned into a fight. She was working extra hours at the dental practice, trying to save money, but Bradley would find it and use it for more gambling. I offered again for her to come stay with me. Told her she could have her old room back, could stay as long as she needed, no pressure, no judgment. But Amanda shook her head. She said she'd made vows to Bradley, for better or worse, and she needed to try to make it work. She was trapped between her commitment to her marriage and the reality that her husband was destroying them both. I respected her choice, even though it killed me to leave her there. As I walked back to my car, I was fishing for my keys when I heard another vehicle pull into the lot. I looked up and froze. Bradley's car. But he wasn't alone. There was a woman in the passenger seat. Younger, maybe late 20s, blonde hair, laughing at something Bradley had said. They didn't see me at first. Bradley parked 3 spots down from where I stood. The woman got out quickly, still smiling, and walked toward the motel office without looking back. Bradley climbed out of the driver's seat, and that's when he spotted me. His expression changed instantly. The easy smile vanished, replaced by something hard and cold. He walked toward me with deliberate steps, and I stood my ground. I asked him who the woman was. Simple question. Bradley's jaw tightened. He told me she was a business associate. Said it wasn't my concern, that I needed to stop showing up uninvited and interfering in his life. His voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. I looked him in the eye and told him I'd always be concerned when it came to my daughter's well-being. Told him that, from where I stood, it looked like he wasn't just gambling away their money, he was gambling away their marriage too. Bradley stepped closer, invading my space. He told me to stay out of his marriage, said if I kept pushing, I'd regret it. Then he walked past me toward the motel room where Amanda was waiting, leaving me standing there with a sick feeling in my gut. I didn't tell Amanda about the woman. Not yet. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that maybe she really was just a business associate, that I was seeing shadows where there was only light. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades solving complex problems by following evidence and logic, knew better. That night, I started a notebook. Documented everything I knew, dates, amounts, conversations. I didn't know what I'd do with the information yet, but my engineering training had taught me to gather data before making decisions. I also called my bank the next morning and made sure my accounts were secure, that no one could access them without my direct authorization. Then I called my lawyer, Harold, who'd handled Carol's estate and my will. Asked him about protecting assets, about what legal options existed if a family member tried to take advantage of an elderly parent. Harold listened carefully and gave me advice. Make sure my will was ironclad. Never co-sign anything. Never give anyone power of attorney without multiple safeguards. Document everything. He didn't ask why I was asking these questions, and I appreciated that. But I could hear the concern in his voice when he told me to call him immediately if anything changed. I updated my estate documents that week, made sure everything would go directly to Amanda, with provisions that protected her inheritance from any spouse who might try to claim it. It felt cold and calculating, preparing for battle with my own son-in-law, but I'd learned a long time ago that hope for the best and prepare for the worst wasn't just a saying, it was survival. The call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night, about a month before everything exploded. I was already in bed, reading a book about the history of railroads, when my phone rang. Amanda's name lit up the screen. I answered before the second ring. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. I sat up, heart pounding, and tried to calm her down enough to tell me what happened. When she finally could speak, the words tumbled out in a rush. The money was gone. All of it. Every single dollar from the house sale. Bradley had admitted it that evening. He'd lost most of it at casinos in Atlantic City, some of it on online poker sites, and some of it on what he'd called an investment opportunity that turned out to be a complete scam. $230,000 evaporated in less than 4 months. But it was worse than that. They'd been evicted from the motel that morning for not paying. Amanda's car had been repossessed 2 days earlier because Bradley had stopped making the payments months ago. He'd been using the car payment money for gambling. And his job, the pharmaceutical sales position he'd always talked about so proudly, he'd lost that 3 weeks ago. He'd been missing work, showing up late, and they'd finally fired him. Amanda had nowhere to go. She'd been staying with a coworker for the past 2 nights, sleeping on her couch, but she couldn't impose any longer. Her voice was raw with shame and exhaustion as she asked if she could come home. I was already getting dressed before she finished asking. Told her I'd be there in 20 minutes to pick her up. She gave me the address, and I drove through the dark streets with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. When I pulled up to the modest townhouse where her coworker lived, Amanda was sitting on the front steps with 2 suitcases beside her. Everything she owned now fit in 2 bags. I got out and pulled her into a hug, and she collapsed against me, crying so hard her whole body shook. I didn't say anything, just held my daughter the way I'd held her when she was little, and the world felt too big and scary. We drove home in silence. I carried her bags to her old bedroom, the one Carol and I had painted pink when Amanda was 7, because she'd loved that color. The room still had some of her high school memories on the walls. Photos of friends, a ribbon from a track meet, her graduation tassel hanging from the bulletin board. She stood in the doorway looking at it all like she'd traveled back in time. Over the next few days, I focused on taking care of her, made her favorite meals, chicken and dumplings the way Carol used to make it, homemade vegetable soup, comfort food that filled the house with familiar smells. Let her sleep as much as she needed, sat with her when she wanted to talk, and gave her space when she needed to be alone. The details came out slowly, painfully. Bradley had become verbally abusive over the past month. When Amanda questioned his decisions, he'd tell her she was stupid, that she didn't understand anything about money or business. He'd accused her of being unsupportive, of holding him back, of not believing in him. The man I'd thought was charming and successful had revealed himself to be something much darker. Amanda admitted she'd been afraid of him near the end. Not physically afraid, she insisted, but afraid of his anger, his unpredictability. He'd started staying out all night without explanation, coming home at dawn smelling like alcohol and cigarettes. When she'd asked where he'd been, he'd told her it was none of her business. One afternoon while Amanda was napping, I sat in my den and called Harold again, told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Jean, you need to protect yourself legally. If Bradley has burned through all that money, if he's desperate, he might try to come after you next. People who are drowning will grab onto anything to stay afloat." I told Harold I'd already updated my will, but he suggested going further. Creating a trust for Amanda that Bradley couldn't touch, even if they were still married. Adding specific language to my estate documents that excluded any in-laws from inheritance. Making sure my house title was secure and couldn't be challenged. We set up an appointment for the following week to handle all of it. Harold also suggested that Amanda might want to consider legal separation or divorce, but he understood that was her decision to make when she was ready. I didn't push Amanda toward divorce. She was already carrying so much guilt and shame, feeling like she'd failed somehow. I knew from losing Carol that grief and trauma needed time. You couldn't rush healing, but I also knew Bradley wasn't going to stay away forever. He'd come looking for help eventually, and I needed to be ready for that. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 2 weeks after Amanda moved back in with me. It was 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Amanda and I had just finished watching an old movie together, something light and silly to distract her from the wreckage of her life. She'd actually laughed a few times, and hearing that sound had lifted my heart. Then the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Bradley standing on my front porch. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hair uncombed, clothes wrinkled. And his eyes were unfocused in the way that told me he'd been drinking. I opened the door but kept my body in the frame, blocking entry. Told him it was late and he should come back another time when he was sober. Bradley tried to push past me, and I'm not a small man. Years of physical labor and staying active had kept me strong. I held my ground, and he stumbled slightly. He started yelling for Amanda. His voice was loud enough that lights came on in my neighbors' houses. Amanda appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. Bradley saw her and immediately switched tactics. The anger melted away, replaced by tears. He begged her to come down, to talk to him. Said he was sorry, that he'd made terrible mistakes, that he loved her and needed her. Amanda came down slowly, and against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Sometimes people need to see things for themselves, need to hear the words directly before they can accept the truth. Bradley stumbled into my living room, and Amanda guided him to the couch. He collapsed there, crying, making promises. He swore he'd get help, said he'd go to Gamblers Anonymous, that he'd find a new job, that he'd do whatever it took to win her trust back. He grabbed her hands and told her he couldn't live without her, and I watched my daughter's face soften, saw the part of her that still loved him respond to his pain. Then Bradley looked at me with red, swollen eyes and said the words that changed everything. He had nowhere to live. The friend he'd been staying with had kicked him out. He was essentially homeless. And he asked Amanda, right there in my living room, if she'd convince me to let him stay with us, just temporarily, just until he got back on his feet. The room went silent. Amanda turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw desperate hope mixed with pleading. She wanted to believe he could change. She wanted her marriage back. She wanted everything to go back to how it had been before the gambling, before the lies, before everything fell apart. But I'd seen too much. The woman in the car, the abuse, the complete destruction of their financial life, the manipulation, and now this, the ultimate ask, for me to open my home to the man who'd caused all this damage. I knew what my answer had to be, even though it would hurt Amanda, even though she might resent me for it. Because sometimes love means protecting people from their own hope, from their own desire to see good in someone who's proven they can't be trusted. I asked Amanda to step into the kitchen with me. Bradley stayed on the couch, head in his hands, looking like a broken man. In the kitchen, with the door closed between us and him, I spoke quietly but firmly. I told Amanda I loved her more than anything in this world, that I'd do almost anything for her, but I could not, would not, allow Bradley to move into my home. I laid out the reasons. He'd destroyed their financial security through gambling. He'd lied to her repeatedly. He'd become emotionally abusive. He'd possibly cheated on her. He'd lost his job and shown no real accountability for any of it. And now, instead of facing the consequences of his actions and getting real help, he wanted to move into my house, into the safety and security I'd worked 40 years to build. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. She begged me to reconsider, said he was her husband, that he needed help, that maybe if he had stability and support he could turn things around. She promised they'd set boundaries, that she'd make sure he went to meetings, that it would only be temporary. I took her hands in mine, the way I'd done 1,000 times when she was growing up, and I told her the truth as gently as I could. Enabling someone's destructive behavior wasn't love. It was harm disguised as help. Bradley needed to hit bottom, to face the full weight of what he'd done, before he could actually change. And even then, change had to come from him, not from being rescued by others. I told her she was welcome to stay in my home for as long as she needed, forever if she wanted. This was her home too. But Bradley was not welcome. Not after everything he'd done. Not when I had serious concerns that he might be dangerous. Amanda pulled her hands away. She was angry now. Asked me how I could turn away her husband when he was at his lowest. Said I was being cruel, unforgiving. Told me I didn't understand what she and Bradley had been through together. I understood more than she knew. But I also understood that love sometimes means standing firm even when it costs you. Even when the person you're trying to protect doesn't want that protection. Amanda wiped her tears and walked back into the living room. I followed. She knelt in front of Bradley and explained my decision. I watched his face carefully. For just a second, before he controlled it, I saw rage flash in his eyes. Then the mask came back, the tears, the brokenness. But he stood up, and the energy in the room changed. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. He said, "This is my wife's father's house. I have a right to be here." I kept my voice level. "This is my house. You have no rights here. You need to leave." Bradley stepped closer to me, getting right in my space. He was taller than me by a few inches, younger by 30 years. He was trying to intimidate me. I didn't budge. "You old fool," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You don't understand what Amanda and I have been through." I met his stare. "I understand you sold your house, gambled away every penny, and now you want to leech off me. The answer is no." His face turned red. "I'm not leaving without Amanda." Amanda can make her own choice, I said. But you are leaving, now. That's when he grabbed my shirt collar with both hands. Amanda screamed. The fabric bunched in his fists, and he pulled me toward him. I'm 68, but I'm not weak. Years of working with my hands, of staying active, of physical labor had kept me strong. I grabbed his wrists and broke his grip, then pushed him back hard. Bradley stumbled but caught himself, and then he lost whatever control he'd been holding onto. His hand came up fast, and before I could react, he slapped me across the face with the full force of his rage. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. I felt the sting spread across my cheek, felt my lips split against my teeth, tasted blood. Amanda screamed again, a sound of pure horror. For a moment, everything went silent. My ear was ringing. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in the side of my face. Slowly, I turned back to look at Bradley. He was standing there, hands still raised, breathing hard, his eyes wide like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. I touched my lip, looked at the blood on my fingers. Then I looked at Bradley with an expression that made him take a step back. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice was quiet but harder than steel. Bradley tried to backtrack. "I didn't mean. You pushed me. Get out of my house." He looked at Amanda, expecting her to defend him, to leave with him, to choose him over me. Amanda stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hand over her mouth. She was staring at Bradley like she'd never seen him before. Like the man she'd married had been replaced by a stranger. I said it louder this time. "Get out, now." Bradley's face contorted. The mask fell away completely. He pointed at me with shaking hand. "You have no say anymore, old man. Amanda is my wife. This isn't over." Then he stormed toward the door, yanked it open, and slammed it so hard behind him that a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. Amanda collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. I stood there for a moment, my face throbbing, blood on my lip, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. A cold, calculated determination, the kind that comes when someone crosses a line so far that there's no going back. I went to Amanda first, sat beside her, pulled her against me, let her cry. I didn't say anything about Bradley, didn't say I told you so, or that she should have listened. Just held her while she released all the shock and horror and grief. When her sobbing finally quieted to hiccups and shaky breaths, I told her I needed to take care of my face. I went to the bathroom, cleaned the blood from my lip, looked at the red mark spreading across my cheek that would be a bruise by morning. My reflection stared back at me, and I saw something in my eyes I recognized from my years in the working world, from the times I'd had to make hard decisions that affected people's livelihoods and futures. I was done being patient, done being understanding, done hoping Bradley would somehow transform into a decent person. Amanda fell asleep on the couch from emotional exhaustion. I covered her with a blanket, turned off most of the lights, and went to my den, closed the door. Sat at my desk in the lamplight and picked up my phone. It was almost midnight, but I called Harold's cell number anyway. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy with sleep. "Jean? What's wrong?" I told him everything. The confrontation, the slap, the threats. When I finished, Harold was fully awake. "Do you want to press charges for assault?" he asked. I thought about it. Not yet. But I want him out of our lives legally. What are my options? Harold was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "We can pursue a restraining order based on the assault and threatening behavior. That'll keep him away from you and potentially from Amanda if she agrees. We could also look into a civil suit for emotional distress and the threat to your safety in your own home. And Jean, I think we need to look into Bradley's financial activities. If he's as desperate as you say, there might be fraud involved, potentially using Amanda's information. Let me do some digging." I told Harold to do whatever he needed to do, to protect Amanda, to protect me, to make sure Bradley couldn't hurt us anymore. Harold said he'd start first thing in the morning, that he'd have documents ready for my signature within 2 days, and that he was going to hire a private investigator to look into Bradley's finances. After I hung up, I sat in my den for a long time, touched the swelling on my face, thought about how quickly things could fall apart, how someone you trusted could turn into someone you feared. Thought about Carol and wished she was there to tell me I was doing the right thing, but I knew I was. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Bradley had raised his hand to me in my own home, had threatened me. had tried to intimidate and manipulate his way into taking advantage of my love for my daughter. That was the moment I stopped seeing him as family and started seeing him as a threat that needed to be neutralized. I didn't tell Amanda about the legal action right away. She woke up the next morning on the couch, disoriented and puffy-eyed from crying. Saw my bruised face in the morning light, and started crying again. I made her breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and told her we'd figure everything out. That she was safe, that I wasn't angry at her. She needed time to process what had happened, to work through the shock of seeing her husband strike her father. I gave her that time. Kept the house quiet and peaceful, made sure she ate, listened when she wanted to talk, gave her space when she needed to be alone. On the third day after the incident, Harold called my cell. I took the call in the garage where Amanda wouldn't overhear. Harold's voice was grave. "The restraining order has been approved. Bradley can't come within 500 feet of your property. The paperwork is ready for you to sign, and a process server will deliver the subpoena to Bradley this afternoon. He's required to appear in court regarding the assault and harassment charges." I felt a grim satisfaction. "Good. Jean, there's more." Harold paused. "My investigator found something. Bradley didn't just gamble away the money, he took out 3 credit cards in Amanda's name, used her social security number, forged her signature on the applications. He's maxed all 3 out. We're talking $62,000 in debt that Amanda doesn't even know about." My hand tightened on the phone. "That's fraud. That's identity theft. It's a serious crime. We've documented everything. I'm adding this to the case. Jean, Bradley isn't just irresponsible. He's a criminal." After I hung up with Harold, I stood in my garage workshop surrounded by the half-finished projects and tools I'd collected over a lifetime. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. Bradley hadn't just betrayed his marriage vows. He'd committed crimes against Amanda, had stolen her identity, and destroyed her credit, all to feed his addiction. I knew I had to tell her. Walked back into the house and found her in the kitchen making tea. Asked her to sit down. Her face went pale when she saw my expression. I told her everything. About the restraining order, about the legal action, about the credit cards. She sat there, tea growing cold in her hands, as the color drained from her face. At first she was angry I'd done this without telling her. Said I should have asked her first, that she should have had a say. I let her be angry, let her yell. When she ran out of steam, I quietly explained that the credit cards changed everything. This wasn't just about a gambling problem anymore. Bradley had committed identity theft. He'd stolen from her, violated her trust in the most fundamental way. Amanda put her face in her hands. Her voice was muffled when she asked, "What happens now?" I explained the legal process as Harold had explained it to me. The restraining order would keep Bradley away. The fraud charges could be pursued criminally if she agreed. We were building a case to protect her in a divorce, to make sure she wasn't held responsible for Bradley's debts. "I can't believe this is my life," Amanda whispered. 6 months ago I thought we were happy. Now my husband is a criminal and I'm living with my dad at 32 years old. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not a failure. You're a survivor. And we're going to get through this together." She looked at me with red eyes. "What if I want to press charges? For the identity theft? Then that's your choice. I'll support whatever you decide." Amanda took a shaky breath. "I want to press charges. I want him to face consequences. I'm done protecting him." That afternoon, the process server delivered the subpoena to Bradley at an apartment where he'd been crashing with an acquaintance. Harold called me to confirm it was done. 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. Bradley was standing on my porch. He looked terrible, worse than the night of the slap. His clothes were dirty, his face gaunt, his eyes wild, and he was holding the legal papers in his shaking hand. I didn't open the door, just stood there watching him through the peephole. He knocked, soft at first, then harder. "Jean, please. We need to talk. I can explain everything. This is all a misunderstanding." I stayed silent. His voice cracked. "Please, Jean, open the door. I didn't know about the credit cards. Someone must have stolen Amanda's identity. It wasn't me." He was lying. I could hear it in his voice. "Please, Jean. I'll pay everything back. I'll get help. I'll go to treatment. Just drop the charges. Please." I made sure my phone was recording audio. Then I spoke through the closed door. The restraining order says you can't be within 500 feet of this property. You're violating it right now. Leave or I call the police." His desperation turned to panic. His voice got louder, more frantic. "You don't understand what you're doing. There are people I owe money to, dangerous people. If I go to court, if this becomes public, they'll come after me. They'll come after Amanda. They'll come after you." My blood ran cold. He was threatening us, maybe unintentionally, in his panic, but he'd just made a direct threat. I immediately dialed 911 on my cell phone and spoke to the dispatcher, keeping my voice calm and clear. Gave my address. Explained there was a man violating a restraining order on my property and that he'd just made threats against my family. The dispatcher kept me on the line, told me officers were on their way. I could hear them in the background, sending the call out over the radio. Through the peephole, I watched Bradley realize what I'd done. His face went white. He looked at the phone in his hand like it might save him, then at the legal papers, then at my door. The fight went out of him all at once. He sank down onto my porch steps, put his head in his hands. Within 3 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers got out. I stayed inside, watching through the window as they approached Bradley. He didn't resist, didn't run, just sat there, defeated, as they talked to him. I saw him gesture at the papers, saw him point at my house. The officers looked at each other, then one of them spoke into his radio. 5 minutes later, they were putting Bradley in the back of the patrol car for violating the restraining order. I'd recorded his threats. That was evidence. He'd just made everything so much worse for himself. After the police car drove away, one of the officers came to my door. I showed him my ID, explained the situation, gave him my recording. He took notes, gave me a case number, and told me Bradley would be held at least overnight, possibly longer, asked if I felt safe, if I needed anything. I told him I'd be fine, but that I'd increase security at the house just to be careful. That night, after Amanda had gone to bed, I installed security cameras at the front and back doors, changed all the locks, called my neighbors on both sides and explained what was happening, asked them to keep an eye out. They knew me, had known Carol, had watched Amanda grow up. They promised to stay alert. I also called Harold and told him about the threats, about Bradley's mention of dangerous people. Harold's voice got serious. He told me this added another dimension to the case, that if Bradley was involved with loan sharks or organized crime, it needed to be reported to the authorities. He gave me a contact number for the FBI field office in Philadelphia. The next morning, I made that call. Spoke to a special agent named Teresa Grant. She listened to my story and my recording without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Jean, we've been investigating a loan shark operation in the Philadelphia area for about 8 months. If your son-in-law borrowed money from them, he might have information that could help our case. Can you and your daughter come in for an interview?" 2 days later, Amanda and I sat in a plain conference room at the FBI field office. Special Agent Grant was professional, compassionate, and thorough. She explained that the people Bradley likely owed money to were connected to a larger criminal organization. They loaned money at extortionate rates to gambling addicts and other desperate people, then used threats and violence to collect. Amanda answered every question honestly. Told them everything she knew about Bradley's gambling, his debts, his behavior. Agent Grant explained that if Amanda cooperated fully, she'd be given immunity from any charges related to Bradley's activities. She'd also be protected if there were any threats made against her. Amanda agreed to cooperate. She was done protecting Bradley. Done being loyal to someone who'd destroyed her life and threatened her family. In that conference room, I watched my daughter transform from a victim into someone who'd chosen to fight back. Bradley was released after 2 days in jail for violating the restraining order. He was required to stay away from us, to have no contact. For a week, things were quiet. Almost too quiet. Amanda and I settled into a cautious routine. She went back to work at the dental practice. I drove her there and picked her up every day, not willing to risk her safety. Harold's investigation continued. His private investigator had traced Bradley's debts back to a man named Vincent Caruso, someone with known connections to organized crime in Philadelphia. Bradley owed approximately $85,000, when you added up the original loans, plus the interest that had been compounding for months. Special Agent Grant contacted us again. The FBI had moved forward with their investigation of Caruso's operation, and Bradley's involvement gave them leverage. They wanted Bradley to testify against Caruso in exchange for a plea deal on his own charges. Bradley's public defender reached out to Harold, trying to negotiate. Bradley was facing serious time for identity theft, fraud, and assault. The public defender wanted to know if Amanda would consider dropping some of the charges if Bradley cooperated fully with the FBI. Amanda and I discussed it late one night at the kitchen table. She'd changed in the weeks since Bradley's arrest. The softness that had made her vulnerable to his manipulation had been replaced by something stronger. Not harder, exactly, just more grounded, more certain of her own worth. She decided she'd agree to drop the assault charge against me in exchange for Bradley's full cooperation with the FBI and a guarantee that he'd serve time for the identity theft and fraud. Not a slap on the wrist. Real consequences. The negotiations took 2 weeks. During that time, I focused on helping Amanda rebuild her life. We went to therapy together, sessions with a counselor who specialized in families dealing with addiction and financial abuse. Amanda talked about her feelings of shame and failure. I talked about my anger and fear. The counselor helped us process everything, helped Amanda see that none of this was her fault. Amanda also started meeting with a financial advisor to rebuild her credit and plan for her future. The credit cards Bradley had taken out in her name had been reported as fraudulent. The court had ruled she wasn't responsible for the debt. It would take time, but her credit could be repaired. She reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with during her marriage. Started going to lunch with coworkers again. Slowly, I watched her come back to life. The light that had dimmed when Bradley destroyed their life started to glow again. Amanda filed for divorce. Bradley didn't contest it. He had no ground to stand on, no leverage, nothing left to negotiate with. His lawyer advised him to sign the papers and focus on minimizing his prison time. Then Harold called with the final news. Bradley had agreed to testify against Vincent Caruso and his operation. In exchange, Bradley would plead guilty to identity theft and fraud. He'd serve 2 years in minimum security prison. The assault charge would be dropped. Amanda's credit card debt would be legally cleared. The divorce would be finalized. I felt a grim satisfaction. 2 years wasn't enough for what Bradley had done, but it was something, and more importantly, he'd be out of our lives. The legal system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. A week before Bradley's sentencing, something happened that reminded me the danger wasn't completely over. I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice, calm and cold, said, "Mr. Jean, you've caused a lot of trouble for some people. Bradley talked too much. We know where you live. We know your routines. We're just calling to let you know we're watching." Then the line went dead. My hand was shaking as I immediately called Special Agent Grant. She didn't dismiss the threat. Within an hour, she'd arranged for protective surveillance on my house. Unmarked cars would be parked on my street. Agents would be watching. She took the threat seriously, and that both comforted and terrified me. I didn't tell Amanda about the call. She'd already been through enough. I just made sure she stayed close, that I drove her everywhere, that we didn't deviate from our routines unless necessary. 2 days later, Agent Grant called me with news. The FBI had raided Vincent Caruso's operation that morning. 6 people had been arrested, including the man who'd likely made the threatening call to me. Bradley's testimony had been the key to the entire operation. Phone records, financial documents, testimony from other victims, all of it had come together. The danger was over. I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders, sat down in my living room and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months. But Agent Grant had one more piece of information. Bradley had asked to speak to Amanda before his sentencing. He wanted a chance to apologize in person, supervised, at the courthouse. It would be completely Amanda's choice whether to agree to the meeting. I told Agent Grant I'd talk to Amanda about it. That night I laid out the situation. Amanda thought about it for a long time. Then she said she'd go, but only if I came with her. She wanted to hear what Bradley had to say, but she wanted me by her side. 3 days later, we sat in a small conference room at the courthouse. Agent Grant was there, standing by the door. Bradley was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. He looked nothing like the charming man who'd married my daughter 5 years ago. He was thin, pale, his eyes hollow. He sat across from us and didn't speak for a moment. Just looked at Amanda like he was memorizing her face. Then he started talking. He apologized. Took full responsibility for everything he'd done. Admitted his gambling had started years before they got married, that he'd hidden it from everyone. Said he'd convinced himself he could control it, that he'd win it all back, that he could fix everything himself. He admitted taking out the credit cards in Amanda's name, admitted lying to her thousands of times. Admitted that the woman I'd seen in his car was someone he'd been seeing off and on, another betrayal on top of all the others. He apologized to me for the slap, for disrespecting my home, for threatening my family. Said he'd been out of his mind with desperation and fear, but that was no excuse. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask Amanda to give him another chance. Just said he needed us to know that he was sorry, that he understood the damage he'd caused, and that he hoped someday we could both have peace. Amanda listened without crying. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I hope you get the help you need, Bradley. I hope you figure out who you want to be. But we're done. I'm moving on with my life." She stood up, and I stood with her. We walked out of that conference room together, leaving Bradley sitting there with his regrets and his consequences. Amanda didn't look back. In the hallway she turned to me and said, "Thank you for protecting me, Dad. For not giving up on me even when I couldn't protect myself." I pulled her into a hug. That's what fathers do. 6 months passed. Bradley served his sentence at a minimum security facility in western Pennsylvania. Amanda's divorce was finalized. The legal nightmare was over, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. Amanda flourished. She got a raise at the dental practice, recognition for her dedication and skill. She started dating someone new, a high school teacher named Peter, who she'd met through a friend. He was kind, stable, had a good sense of humor. They took things slowly, and I appreciated that. Amanda had learned to be cautious, to look for substance instead of charm. She found an apartment, a cozy one-bedroom place near her work. Spent weekends shopping for furniture, picking out curtains, creating a space that was entirely hers, no one else's debt. No one else's chaos, just hers. I helped her move in on a bright Saturday in October. We carried boxes up the stairs, assembled furniture, hung pictures. That evening, we stood in her little living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and she looked around with this expression of wonder and pride. "I did this," she said softly. "This is mine." I nodded, feeling my throat get tight. "You did this. I'm proud of you." She turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you did, Dad. For protecting me, for standing up to Bradley when I couldn't, for getting me through all of it." I pulled her into a hug. "I was just being your father." She shook her head against my shoulder. "No, Dad, you did more than that. You showed me what real strength looks like. You protected me, even when I didn't want to be protected. You set boundaries when I couldn't. You saved me." That's when I started crying. First time I'd cried since the whole ordeal began. All the fear, the anger, the worry, the determination, it all came out in tears I'd been holding back for months. Amanda held me while I cried, and it felt like the roles had reversed for a moment. My daughter comforting me. Then we both laughed through our tears at how ridiculous we looked, two grown people standing in an empty apartment crying and laughing at the same time. She pulled back and looked at me seriously. "You taught me the most important lesson, Dad. Love doesn't mean accepting destruction. Love means standing firm when someone you care about is in danger, even if they can't see it yet, even if they fight you. You loved me enough to say no to Bradley, to protect me from myself, from my own hope that he'd change." I nodded, unable to speak. "I'll never forget that," she said. "And I'll never let anyone treat me that way again. I know my worth now. I know what I deserve, and I learned that from you." 3 months later, I attended Amanda's housewarming party. Her apartment was full of people, co-workers, friends, her new boyfriend Peter, who seemed like a genuinely good man. He was attentive without being controlling, funny without being cruel, stable in a way that Bradley never was. I watched Amanda laugh, really laugh, for the first time in over a year. She caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "Thank you." I smiled and raised my glass of soda to her. Peter came over and introduced himself properly. We talked about his work teaching history at the local high school, about his family, about how he and Amanda had met. He was respectful, asked about my life, seemed genuinely interested. When he talked about Amanda, His face lit up with affection, but it was grounded, real, not the manic intensity Bradley had displayed at the beginning. Later, as guests were leaving, Amanda walked me to my car. The night was cool, stars visible above the streetlights. She gave me a long hug. "I'm going to be okay, Dad," she said. "Better than okay. I'm going to be happy." "I know you are," I told her. "You're stronger than you ever knew." I drove home that night with my windows down, feeling lighter than I had in years. The house was quiet when I arrived. But it was a peaceful quiet. Not lonely, just calm. I sat in my favorite chair, the one Carol used to tease me about because the cushion was permanently molded to my shape, looked at her picture on the mantel, taken on our 30th anniversary, her smile bright and genuine. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to the empty room. "Our girl is going to be just fine." That night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no fear, just peace. Now, let me share what I learned from all of this, because if you're listening to this story, maybe you're in a situation where someone is pushing your boundaries, disrespecting your home, your family, or yourself. I've lived 68 years on this earth, and I've seen a lot. But those months with Bradley taught me something I want to share with anyone who needs to hear it. There's a difference between helping someone and enabling their destruction. There's a difference between love and allowing yourself to be abused. And there's a difference between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right. When Bradley slapped me and told me I had no say anymore, he was wrong. I had every say. It was my home, my life, my daughter's future. And I wasn't going to let him destroy any of it. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. It's an act of love. When you allow someone to steamroll over you, over your values, over your safety, you're not helping them. You're helping them dig their own grave. And sometimes, you fall in with them. I also learned that being a parent never stops. Amanda is 32 years old. She's a grown woman. But she's still my daughter. And when I saw her drowning in Bradley's chaos, I didn't hesitate. I threw her a lifeline. She didn't want to grab it at first. She fought me. But I held it out anyway. Because that's what fathers do. The hardest part wasn't the slap. It wasn't the legal battles. It wasn't even the threats from criminals. The hardest part was watching my daughter suffer and knowing I couldn't fix her pain. I could only walk beside her through it. I could only make sure she knew she wasn't alone. And in the end, that was enough. Amanda came out stronger. She came out wiser. She came out free. And I came out knowing I did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier to just let Bradley move in and keep the peace. Because peace bought at the cost of your dignity, your safety, and your self-respect isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I didn't raise my daughter to surrender. Carol and I raised her to stand tall, to know her worth, to demand respect. Bradley tried to take that from her, but she got it back. We got it back together. So if you're in a situation where someone is pushing your boundaries, disrespecting your home, your family, or yourself, I want you to hear this. You have a say. You always have a say. Your home is your sanctuary. Your life is yours to protect. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is say one simple word, no. I said no to Bradley. And it saved my daughter's life. It saved my own peace. And it taught both of us that we're stronger than we ever knew. Love requires boundaries. Protection sometimes means saying no. Strength comes from standing firm in your values, even when those you love resist. And real justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration, healing, and moving forward with dignity intact. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? Have you ever had to say no when everything in you wanted to say yes just to keep the peace? How did you find the strength to stand firm? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with the same decision right now. If this story resonated with you, if it helped you see your own situation more clearly, or gave you the courage to protect yourself or someone you love, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss more stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we have the right to say no, that our boundaries matter, that our safety and dignity are worth protecting. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear in places, but I hope it leaves you feeling stronger, more certain of your own worth, and more willing to stand up for what's right in your own life. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember, you always have a say.